The 2022 Indian Chief Bobber. Indian Motorcycle is celebrating the 100th anniversary of its iconic Chief family line, and part of that party belongs to the new Chief Bobber that'll bring to mind the gassers of yesteryear. Old school lines join with early performance tinkering to give the Bobber a charm all its own, even while it makes connections to models from Indian's own rich history. The Thunderstroke engine ties it all together with its faux-flathead construction that turns in a thoroughly modern performance that will serve you well in the urban jungle of your choice. 2022 Indian Chief Bobber design. Back before the advent of the aftermarket proper, riders were forced to do what they could to improve performance, and frequently this involved a concerted effort to lighten the bike by removing or paring down anything that doesn't directly contribute to speed. Enter the Bobber. The front fender on the Chief Bobber sets the stage with over half of its original size hitting the cutting room floor and an asymmetrical shape that just screams shade tree. A minimal nacelle closes off the triple tree from casual view behind a classic single round headlight housing that contains more modern tech with LED projectors to ensure that you can see and be seen. I could argue that the beer can fork skirts are superfluous, but the impact they have on the visual weight is necessary to capture the look of the old bikes. Blackout treatment runs rife to become the dominant color throughout, which makes a connection to the old school custom culture to add to the Bobber's pedigree. Mini apes lift your hands and encourage an upright riding position, while the forward footboards complete the rider's triangle and place the rider in a comfortable windsock position. The stock solo saddle rides at 26 inches off the deck to make it easy to deploy your Lamborghinis with confidence, even for vertically challenged riders, and make for easy parking lot maneuvers and the like. Beer can skirts make it onto the rear shocks for another historical throwback that tidies up the rear end by hiding the coil springs with a heavily whacked rear fender that's chopped down to the limits of functionality. This leaves room for only a narrow LED light bar for the tail light and displaces the tag off to the left side of the rear end, showbike style. 2022 Indian Chief Bobber chassis. The new Chief line comes built around a new frame all its own with a drop in the backbone that mimics the look of the bones of old. Even though the factory doesn't go so far as to make a faux rigid rear end like Harley-Davidson's Softail for instance, the angle of the upper frame member is picked up by the rear shocks to leave the Chief Bobber with at least the suggestion of a rigid rear end to boost its classic chops further yet. Welded steel tubing makes up the main frame with a cast aluminum subframe to complete the bones and eliminate some weight. The well-visible steering head establishes a rake angle of 29 degrees and lends the front of the frame a bit of a chopper-esque look without any actual stretch in the downtubes. A set of 16-inch hoops round out the rolling chassis with blackout rims and hubs laced up with polished wire spokes. Up front, this factors in with the rake for a rather lengthy trail metric at 5.2 inches long to lend the Chief Bobber some rock-solid tracking in crosswinds and when negotiating the pressure waves from the surrounding traffic at interstate speeds. The 46mm front forks come sans adjustments to leave the variable preload in the shocks out back as the lone suspension tweak to be found on this machine. Beefy Pirelli Night Dragon rubber rounds out the rolling chassis with a 130/90ths ahead of a 180/65ths and are made to look fatter yet by the blackout rims that mount them. A single front brake operates with a 4-piston caliper that binds a 300mm disc with a like-sized disc and twin-pod anchor out back. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that at 694 pounds soaking wet, this bike is really pushing that single front brake to its limits, and I'd have gone with dual brakes up front if given my druthers. That said, the optional ABS feature will let you safely get the most out of the brakes, so there's that. 2022 Indian Chief Bobber drivetrain. Power comes from the proven Thunderstroke 111 plant with a generous 108 pound-feet of torque that tops out at a low 3,200 revolutions per minute to help pull the Chief Bobber out of the hole and give it a spirited roll on just about anywhere in the rev range. Faux cooling fins adorn the rocker box covers to give it a classic flathead look with parallel pushrod tubes to reinforce that illusion. The cooling fins on the jugs, however, are the real McCoy, as the 49-degree V-twin is strictly air-cooled, so there's no water or oil cooler to ugly up the front of the frame. Bore and stroke mic out at 101 mm and 113 mm respectively for a 1811 cc total displacement and 9.5:1 compression ratio. That's right around the break between 87 octane and 89 octane fuel requirements. Induction control falls to a 54 mm throttle body and electronic fuel injection system, but that's just the beginning of the engine electronics. Rear cylinder deactivation kicks in when idling to reduce the heat produced by the engine at stops, and the engine sports a trio of ride modes that allow you to dial in the performance curve to suit your mood and/or the prevailing conditions. A gear-type primary sends engine power to the 6-speed, constant mesh transmission through a standard wet clutch and onto the rear wheel via a tough, low-maintenance belt and pulley system. All told, the final drive ratio will get the thing up to right around 115 miles per hour, plenty fast for public roads. 2022 Indian Chief Bobber price. The base model, non-ABS Chief Bobber rolls in black metallic for $15,999 or ruby metallic, also sans ABS, for $16,499. If you prefer ABS protection, you can get the bobber in the same colors with ABS for $16,799 or $17,299, respectively. 2022 Indian Chief Bobber competitors. It's tough to find an import that hits all the pertinent notes for this particular slice of Americana, so it was straight to Harley-Davidson and its Fat Bob 114 for this head-to-head matchup. Harley-Davidson Fat Bob 114. Harley-Davidson put together its Fat Bob 114 with an eye toward the old gasser bikes. This manifests itself in the heavily bobbed fenders both front and rear and the drilled-out exhaust shields. There is no shortage of blackout paint on either bike, so that crucial connection is made to the old-school custom culture. HD wasn't quite as slavish to history. Sure, the softtail frame sets the stage with very old-school lines, but the Milwaukee 8V twin rolls without the faux flathead details to leave it looking like what it is, a thoroughly modern engine that has clearly evolved from the early lumps. The 45-degree V and air cooling does much to channel those earlier engines without resorting to aesthetic manipulation. That's not to say the Thunderstroke is a lesser engine, it's just one for which the factory puts old-school charm on a front burner. At 114 cubic inches, the HDM8 is a skosh larger, and this pays off in the power output as it cranks out 118 pounds of grunt against 108 pounds from the Indian plant, but honestly, that difference will hardly be noticeable on even the most tuned Heine dynos. Another modern touch is found in the inverted, race-style forks on the Fat Bob, and much to Harley's credit, the factory opted for dual front brakes and stock ABS protection to manage the 676-pound wet weight for a clear advantage over the Chief Bobber. The King of Paint offers the Fat Bob 114 in a choice of two color packages or the Vivid Black base model, and price is linked with color as the Vivid Black rolls for $18,799 and color packages fetch $19,199. I leave it to you to decide if that double fistful of extra torque is worth the extra Benjamins for the HD model. Read our full review of the Harley-Davidson Fat Bob 114. He said, at a time when HD is shrinking its cruiser line, Indian is expanding theirs instead. This new Chief platform looks to be the Indian we have been waiting for, even if it bears little resemblance to the original Chief that was actually a frame tank design in keeping with the standard in the years immediately following the Great War. I mean, you can only go so far when paying homage to historical bikes, particularly with model families as old as the Chief's. She said. My wife and fellow motorcycle rider, Alan Hinton, says the Chief is 100 years old and this modern version of the Chief Bobber is a nice blend of old-school looks and modern tech. It looks the part of post-World War I styling and marries that with tech like cruise control, keyless ignition, ride modes, and of course Indian bestowed it with rear cylinder deactivation that reduces the heat washing up over you at a stoplight. 2022 Indian Chief Bobber specifications.
If you liked this video, please share your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to hit the subscribe button.